In the 1960s, a Pennsylvania-based company called NUMEC, the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, fell under suspicion of secretly shipping large quantities of highly enriched uranium to Israel in order to help kickstart that country's clandestine nuclear weapons program. Despite several investigations by the FBI, the Department of Energy, and the General Accounting Office, the estimated 337 kilograms of missing uranium has never been definitively accounted for. NUMEC was founded in 1956 to process and refine nuclear material for various applications, including providing the fuel for the U.S. Navy's uranium-powered submarines. The company set up a processing plant in Apollo, Pennsylvania, sharing the same location as Apollo Industries Incorporated, which provided much of the funding for the creation of NUMEC. Two of the key people involved in the birth of NUMEC were also the primary focus of the allegations of diverting nuclear material to Israel: Zalman Shapiro, the president of NUMEC, and David Lowenthal, an officer of Apollo Industries and CEO of the Raycord Corporation, a company with which NUMEC shared property. From 1960 onwards, inspections of the NUMEC plant by the U.S. Department of Energy began to show severe discrepancies in NUMEC's records accounting for the amounts of material being processed and shipped by the company. Despite continued problems with the management of the plant and a recommendation by a DOE inspector to cut off the supply of material to NUMEC, the company was allowed to continue its operations. In 1965, the matter came to a head when the DOE conducted a full inventory inspection at the plant. They discovered that over 200 pounds of highly enriched uranium could not be accounted for. Consequently, the DOE asked the FBI to investigate the possibility that the uranium had been smuggled out of the plant. The FBI refused. They did, however, begin an investigation to determine whether or not Zalman Shapiro was acting as an agent of the Israeli government. Despite the DOE's findings, the FBI's 1965 investigation of Shapiro was triggered by contact from the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission about NUMEC creating a new company in Israel called ISARAD Limited. ISARAD was jointly owned by Shapiro and the Israeli government. NUMEC supplied ISARAD with the radioactive isotope cobalt-60. When the FBI interviewed Marlon Ebert, a former NUMEC employee, he recalled one unusual instance of a cobalt-60 shipment to Israel, where the containers were packed and sealed late at night by a group of employees. He noted that the lead casks had excess space in them that would make it easy to ship additional nuclear material. Another former NUMEC employee told the FBI that he had witnessed Zalman Shapiro personally managing the loading of a flatbed truck. The truck was being loaded with canisters that he identified as the type that highly enriched uranium was transported in. When he looked at the shipping order, he saw that the destination was Israel. The clipboard holding the order was snatched from him, and he was told that the shipment details were confidential. An armed guard then ordered him to leave the loading dock. The following day, the plant personnel manager threatened to fire him if he didn't keep his mouth shut. In the Department of Energy inspection in May of 1962, NUMEC was found to be mixing materials across different contracts. This practice was prohibited, and as the DOE inspectors observed, it also made it nearly impossible to track individual batches of material as they left the factory. The issue of accounting for nuclear material grew even worse in 1964, as NUMEC claimed that early in the year some of their accounting records were destroyed during a labor dispute at the plant. The DOE had planned an inventory audit of NUMEC in September 1964, but cancelled it due to the incredibly poor state of the records. In the 1966 security check of the NUMEC facility, the DOE inspector came to believe that some of the missing uranium had actually been shipped to France. When the inspector returned to the Director of Security to voice his concerns, the director told him to get out of his office and not investigate the matter any further. Shapiro had co-founded another company called NUMENCO with the French organization SAIP. France formed a secret nuclear deal with Israel in 1957, with French engineers involved in covertly building the Dimona reactor in Israel. Despite the problems evident with NUMEC's operations, the initial investigation into Zalman Shapiro by the FBI came to nothing. However, he would once again come under the FBI's scrutiny in 1968, when the CIA director Richard Helms requested a discreet investigation of Shapiro's relationship with the Israeli government. The FBI also undertook surveillance on Shapiro's business associate David Lowenthal. They uncovered the following people the two men had come in contact with. Colonel Avraham Eloni, a senior member of Israeli military intelligence, or Aman. Eloni met Shapiro several times in 1968, with meetings taking place in Apollo and Washington, D.C. General David Carman, the military attaché of the Israeli embassy in Washington, an Israeli intelligence agent and a close contact of Lowenthal. Abraham Bendor, also known as Abraham Shalom, an agent of Israel's internal security service, the Shin Bet. He visited the NUMEC plant as part of a group of Israeli officials in September 1968. Bendor would later rise to become the director of the Shin Bet in 1981. Rafi Eitan, an agent of both the Shin Bet and Mossad. He accompanied Bendor on the 1968 visit to NUMEC, utilizing the cover story of a chemist from the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Eitan became infamous as the handler of Jonathan Pollard, an Israeli spy convicted in 1987 of passing classified information from the US to Israel. Avraham Hamoni, an agent of LEKEM, an organization dedicated to gathering technical intelligence for Israel's nuclear program. Another visitor to NUMEC in 1968, his cover was the scientific counselor at the Israeli embassy in Washington. In an interview with journalist Seymour Hersh, Shapiro admitted knowing the head of LEKEM, Benjamin Bloomberg. David Lowenthal was found to have very close ties to Israel. In the 1940s, he served in the Haganah, the Zionist paramilitary organization under the command of Meir Amit, the future head of Mossad. In a letter to Lowenthal, Amit wrote, "I remember you as a big Zionist and always ready to do things in order to help Israel. You have gained many friends in our country." Lowenthal was also a close friend of David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. Shapiro and Lowenthal were more than just business associates. They were also close neighbors, both residing on Bartlett Street in Pittsburgh. There were even allegations that Shapiro was contacting Israel using a scrambler phone to encode his calls. Regardless of the connections the FBI had established between NUMEC and Israeli intelligence, the investigation again led to nothing. In a letter to Richard Helms, the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, stated that the Bureau would not investigate further due to the Atomic Energy Commission's decision to halt inquiries. In 1969, Helms again contacted Hoover, asking the FBI to conduct audio surveillance of Shapiro. This was triggered by the CIA suspecting that Shapiro was planning to emigrate to Israel. 4 days later, Hoover replied by instructing Helms to seek authorization from the Attorney General. Helms neglected to do so. In October 1970, Shapiro left NUMEC and took up a new job at Kawecki Barilko Industries, a company also associated with the AEC, producing atomic weapons components made of beryllium. Within 2 weeks of joining the company, Shapiro had again drawn the attention of the FBI by asking to be informed of a classified project being run there. As time wore on in the wake of the investigation of NUMEC, the AEC, the CIA, and the FBI began to be suspected of engaging in a cover-up. Charles Keller, an employee of the DOE's Oak Ridge nuclear facility, protested the renewal of contracts with NUMEC given their sloppy materials accounting. He told the FBI, "If I was planning to steal nuclear material, I would use exactly this kind of an operation." Keller was also quoted by a journalist as saying, "I don't know what pressures were being brought politically and otherwise in Washington to keep that company operating. I wouldn't have given them any more until they'd straightened up and flew right. But I guess mine was the voice crying in the wilderness." The suspicion of American complicity in the NUMEC affair was heightened in 1978 when the U.S. General Accounting Office conducted their own investigation into the alleged diversion of uranium to Israel. The GAO also aimed to determine whether the CIA had aided NUMEC in the process. In the GAO report, investigators claimed that they were stonewalled by the FBI and particularly by the CIA on many occasions. During our review, we were denied documents pertinent to the NUMEC incident by the FBI and the CIA. We repeatedly tried to obtain documents from these groups, but with no success. As we got further into our review, the CIA blocked our efforts to continue. Two former CIA officials interviewed by the GAO stated that they had been involved in the creation of documents directly linking the missing NUMEC uranium to Israel. When the GAO interviewed the former CIA director about this, he refused to confirm or deny the existence of the documents. From 1954 to 1975, James Angleton was the CIA's chief of counterintelligence. He was also in charge of the Israeli account, liaising with Mossad and the Shin Bet. He is now believed to have aided the Israeli secret nuclear weapons program. In 2009, Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter, famous for promoting the single-bullet theory of the JFK assassination, asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to provide a public statement officially exonerating Zalman Shapiro from any involvement in diverting uranium to Israel. Specter was known for being a pro-Israel advocate throughout his career, maintaining a close association with the Zionist Organization of America, a group in which both Zalman Shapiro and David Lowenthal held senior positions. Ivan Novick, a director of Apollo Industries and one of the main figures involved in the creation of NUMEC, was the president of the ZOA from 1978 to 1982.